Okay, we're here on a cold winter's morning in Somerset. We're about to start laying an engineered timber floor. So I'm going to go through some of the processes that we'll use and some of the tools that we'll use too. Okay, let's get started. Okay, some bits and pieces, some tools and materials we're going to be using. These are floor tensioners. It's basically just a ratchet strap that truck drivers use to attach things to the back of their lorries. And you just hook the two sides onto the floorboards. If there's ever any gap between them that you can't close up with a little bit of pressure, you attach this over your floorboards and it will squeeze them together like that. We'll also need a good quality wood glue. We're going to do a whole floating floor today, so all the bits of flooring are going to be glued together. That means that as the floor expands and contracts, as the room gets hotter and colder, the whole floor moves as one and it expands, and then as it pulls back together, it will pull away from the skirting instead of gaps opening up between our floorboards. Because the floor is going to expand and contract, we need an expansion gap around the edge. This will be covered by the skirting board once it's put in place. But to fill that gap, we'll put this cork strip in. Okay. What that'll do is, as the floor expands, the cork will compress. And then as the floor contracts again, instead of the flooring pulling away from one side and leaving a gap along the skirting, this cork will ensure that it pulls away evenly from both sides, and you're left with a beautiful floor with no gaps around the edges. Most importantly is our floor. Today we're using an engineered floor. It's a hardwood laminate on top of essentially a sheet of plywood. That means that the grain of the timbers are laid like this, which makes it much more resistant to expansion and contraction, makes it much more stable to cupping and twisting, and is just generally a better product than a solid hardwood floor. So our floor needs to be laid on an underlay. This is basically just a foam sheet with a tinfoil backer to it. The tinfoil goes down, it stops any moisture coming up from the substrate and the floor underneath, and the foam just gives a cushion onto the boards, takes out any unevenness in the floor and gives a little bit of softness to the flooring. So the boards have been left in the room for about a week now. You need to give the boards time to acclimatise to the room for the temperature and the humidity. They'll expand and contract as they get hotter and colder or more and less moist. The boys are now just going through and sorting all the boards into different sizes, picking out any that have got defects or that are particularly darker than the others. We'll use them for cuts later on. And putting them into sizes just helps you lay your floor properly, get all the joints where you want them to be. Okay, so before you start laying your floor, you want to consider where your boards are going to lie. Now Steve's been kind enough to mark out some of the board widths for me on the underlay. And what we're looking for is, as we get towards the wall, we don't want to end up with a tiny little cut that disappears underneath the skirting. It's hard to fit and it just doesn't look right. You also want to end up with a similar size cut on this side of the room as you do to the other side. And it just makes for a much neater, tidier job. So a little bit of forethought before you actually start makes the whole job a lot better at the end. So in a new build, what you'd do is you'd have a lovely straight wall fitted by your excellent carpenter, and you'd be able to start with your first board 10 mil off the wall for your expansion gap. What we've got is an old barn which has a wiggly wall, so we're going to have to scribe that last board in there. So all we've done is loosely laid these first boards where they're going to lie, and then we can come along afterwards, push our boards up, cut what we need to cut off and put that first run in. Once that's in, then the whole floor will just fall out from that point. Okay, so we've been working our way along scribing these boards into this wall. What I've got here is a pair of compass And I've got a board that's 180mm wide, so I've set my compass to that width. Now if I lay my board exactly where it wants to go, but one board over, then I know that this board wants to move 180mm that way, and then it will sit perfectly into the space. So with my calipers set at the width of the board, and draw the scribe line using the wall as a reference. And then around these pipes as well. This is all going to be under some kitchen units, so not the most vital area. And the pipes come to there. Okay, now we'll cut this piece off, and that board should fit perfectly in there. This measurement is a tight fit between the wall and the boards, so I also want a 10mm expansion gap, so I'm going to cut an extra 10mm off the board to give me that space. Right, this board's ready to fit. I've cut the scribe line on it. Okay, we're going to put the glue on. The best thing to do is turn the board over and run the glue down the back of the tongue, and that way when you squeeze the two boards together, you don't get any squeeze out coming up on top of your board. Okay, so just a very thin bead of glue. Okay, and on the end joint as well. I want to close up the joint on the end of this board here. All I've got is a little offcut with the tongue still attached. This is just so that when I tap on the board, I don't want to actually hit on this board because it will damage the edges. So all you do is with a little offcut, put the tongue inside there, give it a little tap, and it brings the joint together. Okay, so we've got the floor finished. Everything's cut in. We've scribed all the boards around these around the entranceways. You can see we've left our 10mm expansion gap all round, and I've pushed some of the cork filler into those gaps to stop the floor from moving. The next job's putting the skirting and the trims on. So the skirting is just going to sit over our expansion gaps, and it just tidies the junction between the wall and the floor. That's what your skirting's for. Around our doorways, just because we haven't got space, the height for a skirting, we're just going to use an oak quadrant. It's a hardwood that will match close to what the floor is, so it'll disappear into the flooring once it's treated the same way. And yeah, I'll move along with that now. Thanks for following along. I hope this was helpful for you guys.